I am my mother's lawyer, and I will fight for her." The words rang out across the courtroom, stunning everyone present. They hadn't come from a seasoned attorney, but from a little black boy, barely tall enough to reach the judge's gaze. His small hand had shot up with unshakable courage, his young voice filled with determination. For a moment, the entire courtroom froze. Lawyers, spectators, even the judge himself. No one could have predicted that this child's bold declaration would change everything. But what happened next would leave every single person in that courtroom speechless. The boy's mother, Angela, had been fighting battles long before she ever stepped into a courtroom. She was a single mother raising her only son David, in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce and discrimination was everywhere. Despite her struggles, Angela worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices by night and working at a diner by day, just to keep food on the table. But then came the breaking point. Their landlord, a wealthy businessman with powerful connections, claimed she had broken her lease. In truth, he wanted her out, replacing tenants like Angela with higher-paying renters. When she protested, he dragged her into court with expensive lawyers, who seemed determined not just to evict her, but to crush her spirit. Angela had no lawyer. She couldn't afford one. She thought about representing herself, but the legal language and procedures overwhelmed her. The system seemed designed to make people like her fail. Through all of this, little David watched silently. He was only 10 years old, but his eyes saw everything. His mother's exhaustion, the unfairness in the landlord's tone, and the quiet pain of being powerless. While Angela prepared for court, David stayed up late at night, searching through old law books at the library, reading everything he could find about tenants' rights. He didn't understand it all, but he understood one thing. His mother was being treated unfairly, and someone had to stand for her. Angela never imagined that someone would be her own son. On the morning of the trial, she dressed in her only formal outfit, her hands trembling as she held David's. She whispered, "Just pray for me." What she didn't know was that David was about to do far more than pray. The courtroom was intimidating. High ceilings, polished wooden benches, and men in dark suits filled the room. The landlord's attorneys were confident, whispering to one another with smirks on their faces. Angela sat at the defendant's table alone, her papers neatly stacked but her hands shaking. The judge entered and the trial began. The landlord's lawyers moved quickly, throwing around complex legal terms, citing precedents Angela couldn't understand. They painted her as irresponsible, careless, and unfit to hold her lease. Each word cut deeper into her, and she lowered her head, feeling smaller and smaller under their attack. David sat quietly beside her, listening intently. His heart pounded, not from fear for himself, but from anger at the way his mother was being humiliated. He clenched his fists, remembering every page he had read in those law books. When the judge turned to Angela and asked if she had any defense, her lips parted, but no words came out. She was drowning in fear. That was the moment David stood up. He raised his small hand high in the air, his voice steady as he said the words that stopped the entire room. "I am my mother's lawyer, and I will fight for her." Gasps echoed. The judge looked stunned. The opposing lawyers exchanged laughs, whispering under their breath. Surely this was a joke, a child claiming to be a lawyer. But David wasn't joking. He stepped forward, his chin lifted with determination. The judge hesitated. Legally, a child couldn't practice law, yet something about David's courage commanded attention. Instead of dismissing him, the judge allowed the boy to speak. Not as a lawyer, but as a voice on behalf of his mother. David took a deep breath and began. He spoke not with legal jargon, but with raw honesty and facts he had carefully memorized. He explained how his mother always paid rent on time, how the landlord had refused repairs that were his responsibility, how eviction wasn't about broken rules but about greed. His words were simple, but they cut deeper than any lawyer's arguments. The courtroom shifted. Some people leaned forward, captivated. The landlord's lawyers tried to interrupt, but the judge raised a hand, letting David continue. Minute after minute, David laid out his case, quoting passages he had copied from library books, connecting them to his mother's story. His voice wavered at times, but his conviction never broke. He spoke of sleepless nights, of watching his mother cry in silence, of how unfair it was to take away the only home they had. By the time he finished, the courtroom was no longer laughing. It was silent. The little boy had done what no adult lawyer had managed. He made justice feel human again. The landlord's lead attorney rose, visibly rattled. He scoffed, calling David's speech irrelevant and childish. But his words rang hollow. For the first time, the courtroom wasn't listening to him. They were still stunned by David's bravery. The judge leaned back, eyes fixed on the boy. "Son," he said carefully, "you are not a lawyer, but today you have spoken more truth than most lawyers do in a lifetime. Angela wept quietly, her face buried in her hands. She had come into this courtroom expecting defeat, humiliation, and eviction. Instead, her son had given her something she thought she'd lost long ago: hope. The judge turned to the landlord's side. "You brought this case forward with confidence, certain it would be an easy victory. But what I've heard today forces me to reconsider. Not just the law, but the fairness behind it." The tension was unbearable. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the ruling. Finally, the gavel came down. "Case dismissed." Angela gasped. David's eyes widened. The landlord's lawyers erupted in protest, but the judge silenced them. This mother and child deserve better than to be bullied out of their home. Justice is not for sale. At that moment, David's small shoulders sagged in relief. He had done the impossible. Against all odds, he had saved his mother. As they walked out of the courthouse, reporters and spectators whispered about what they had just seen. A 10-year-old boy had stood up against the system and won. For Angela, it was more than a legal victory. It was proof that she was not alone. Her son believed in her when no one else did. David didn't just defend his mother. He exposed something bigger. His courage reminded everyone that justice isn't only about laws written in books, but about the truth spoken from the heart. In the days that followed, their story spread. Neighbors who once looked away now looked at Angela with respect. Community leaders shared David's act of bravery as a symbol of resilience. Even the judge later admitted that it was one of the most extraordinary cases he had ever witnessed. Angela returned to her night shifts and long days, but something had changed. Each time she saw her son, she no longer just saw a boy. She saw the strength of a young man who had carried her when she was too weak to carry herself. And David? He never stopped reading, never stopped learning. That day in court had awakened something inside him. He realized he didn't just want to be his mother's lawyer for one case. He wanted to fight for justice. His whole life. The story of that little boy's raised hand in a courtroom is a reminder for all of us. Sometimes, the most powerful voices come from the smallest people. So, let me ask you this. If a 10-year-old child can stand up to injustice and win, what excuse do the rest of us have to stay silent?